Hello, and thank you for listening in on my third phase of my FS475 course project. Once again, I am analyzing my sugar intake day to day and aiming to reduce it and regulate it. Here's my problem statement once more. I'm currently consuming more sugar than I'd like to each day, and I'm consuming it in very irregular amounts. So here's just some parameters for the project once again. This does only include added and naturally occurring sugars, and it does not include starches or cellulose, things like that. This excess sugar has led to lethargic behavior, sugar crashes, acne breakouts, etc. And I'm hoping to reduce my average daily sugar intake and regulate the daily amount to a consistent level. So here's my baseline data again for the last measure phase. Here I collected the amount of sugar I was eating day to day by using a Samsung Health app in which I would put in all the food that I ate throughout the day, and it would tell me the amount of sugar that I was eating for each day. So that's how I tracked it. Here I have the X-bar or average, my median, and my range for the data. And this was taken over 3 weeks. So I knew that I had some irregularities with the sugar intake, and it was very much more than I would like to eat. So I wanted to get down to the causes of why I was consuming more sugar than I'd like to. So I first decided to use a fishbone diagram so I could break down the possible causes for my overconsumption of sugar. I decided that the people and the process phases, components were the most important part of the root causes. The people includes myself and why I made the decision to eat sugar in the first place. And also the process was very important, not packing food for the day and not preparing food for the week was a very big part of why I was eating a lot of sugar. Of course, the environment, the materials, and measurements were also very important, but I did decide that my possible root causes were not managing my time well and using sugar as a way to reward myself. And this is further supported by my 5 whys statistical tool. So I asked myself these 5 questions, and I did get to the bottom of it. It looked like I wasn't keeping to my planner and balancing my activities, which is very true. Sometimes I get lazy at the end of the day. I'm not budgeting time well, and that causes me to not pack food for the next day, meaning that I tend to purchase unhealthy and expensive sugary snacks to keep myself satisfied when I am starving at school without any food. So this is even more supported. The second improvement that I mentioned, that I was using sugar as a way to reward myself. This bar graph shows that I am doing that, because as I break down my sugar intake per day or by day of the week, I can see that Fridays and Saturdays tend to have the most amount of sugar consumed on average, which makes sense because at the end of the week, I'm really tired. I just want to reward myself. I want to have a stress reliever, and I usually turn to eating some cookies, eating my favorite coffee drinks, or drinking them. I really love mochas and things like that. So I found out that this was also a possible root cause. And by knowing these 2 possible root causes, I was able to come up with some improvements to prevent myself from eating too much sugar. I started scheduling a time in my day to prepare healthy food for on the go, and I started to use alternative forms of self-reward, such as watching my favorite episodes of my favorite TV show, or buying a coffee, which I do love coffee, but choosing one that wasn't as sugary. I do love Americanos with cream, so I tended to purchase those instead. Now, by putting these improvements in place, I was able to see how my data changed quite drastically. My mean is already so much less than it was with the baseline data at 45 grams. My median is much less, and my range is also way less. It's at 17 grams instead of 40 grams. So I tracked the habits that I was keeping to each day with the improvements that I had in place. You can see that there are a lot of mistakes made here. Not every day I packed food. Obviously, life gets crazy sometimes. Things happen. It's perfectly normal, but I did try to stay to that as well as I possibly could. And there were times that I did treat myself to something sugary. For example, this weekend of the 3rd and the 4th. That Sunday the 4th was my birthday, so I did eat a slice of cake that Saturday, Sunday, and Monday as part of that, which is perfectly human. It's part of my life. It's not something I'm going to drastically change anytime soon, but overall I did have much better habits for these several weeks that I was putting those improvements in place. Here I have my improved phase bar graph, which you can already see is so much better than the measure phase bar graph. Even though I still have the same tendency on the weekends, it's much less than it was in the earlier bar graph. I'm only at 33.5 grams on average for Saturdays, rather than up in the 60s, 50s, and 60s as I was with the measure phase. And here I have the control charts for the improved phase. I am in a lot better control here. I do have a couple little jumps. Like I mentioned, my birthday was that weekend, so I did have a little bit of lack in control there, but everything looks pretty regular. I don't see any sort of outstanding outliers or anything like that. Same with my range. I only have this one point here that was on that Saturday the 3rd, which is totally understandable. I know why that happened. So everything looks a lot better here, especially in comparison to before, when my average was much higher and I had a lot more points that were pretty irregular, especially with the range. And here we have the histogram. Everything is a lot more centered around the mean, which is very reassuring. I don't have the skewing that I had with the measure phase, where everything is closer to the upper range and things like that. It seems that I did keep everything a lot better towards the mean, which is the goal. And the mean is, like I said, much less than it was in the measure phase histogram. And so I wanted to further support how my data is significantly different than my first set of data, my baseline data. So I did do a one-way ANOVA test on my data comparing the two different sets of data. I decided not to do a two-way ANOVA because some of the times it was hard to distinguish and separate the two improvements. I wasn't able to fully pull out the improvement where I packed food from the no treating myself with sugar improvement, because there were days where I would pack food, but the food I would pack was quite sugary, or there were days that I did not pack food and I would end up eating healthy that day anyways and not having a super sugary food. So it was hard to distinguish the two. I decided just to compare the baseline to my improvement phase data, and there is definitely a statistical difference that I see here. My p-value is 0 or very close to 0, which is much less than 0.05. My means are very different, and they are definitely caused by something that was put into place and not just by random variation. Here's my next steps that I have for the final phase of the project. I've outlined the dates that I would like to complete more improvement data, when I would like to finish my reports, and further show statistical significance and differences between each set of data, and prepare the presentation and written report for the final phase. So I thank you all for listening in today, and let me know if you have any questions.